Attorney Francis Lim, our president, to call the meeting to order.
May I now call the meeting to order? Notices have been sent, and I think we have a quorum, so we can proceed with the transaction of business that may come before the meeting. SharePHIL continues to grow and continues with its advocacies. We have now 138 members, and the board has set a target for membership for 2020. We are targeting to double our membership by that year. So may I ask all SharePHIL members to help the board and the organization in getting more members. We need more members because we have lined up activities and we, the board, cannot do everything. So we intend to expand to the engagement of our members. The more committed members there are, the better it is for our advocacy. We now have a permanent, hopefully she'll stay long, an executive director who will help us steer SharePHIL to our mission and vision. That, frankly speaking, that has been a problem through the years, with a startup organization like ours. But despite that, we have managed to accomplish what we have accomplished so far. Hopefully, our executive director, Ana Pacetas, I think some of you may have noticed, is quite aggressive. She will help us accomplish all that the board of directors and the membership have set to do. Today, we're also happy to announce that we will have our fourth strategic partner pursuant to our strategic agenda to have partnership organizations in order to help us achieve our objectives. And Fred Pascual, the president of ICD, who is also concurrently a trustee of SharePHIL, is here to sign with us the MOA that will forge a more permanent relationship with the Institute of Corporate Directors. For you who do not know, the Institute of Corporate Directors is a very robust organization trying its best to institute a culture of corporate governance among in the corporate world. So I'd like also to encourage SharePHIL members to look at the possibility of becoming members of ICD, because ICD is a very good partner for SharePHIL in terms of developing the capital market, because good corporate governance and respect for shareholders' rights are two big issues in our capital market. And hopefully, with this strategic partnership from with ICD, we will help our corporate sector not only respect shareholders' rights through a culture of corporate governance. We're also, as you may have known, the revised corporation code was passed by Congress. It took effect, I think, on February 15, 2019. It replaced the 1980 corporation code, which is quite obsolete. And if you recall, in several membership meetings, I reported that SharePHIL has been very active in the formulation of the code, and ICD was very, very active too. So it's now there. There are a lot of provisions that are pro-shareholder, and there are a lot of provisions that institute good corporate governance practices in the code. It's now law, so it's not a matter of comply or explain, because many of the provisions under the comply or explain corporate governance manual code of the SEC are now part of the revised corporation code. That should make a lot of difference in terms of protecting and promoting shareholders' rights. Very soon, we will have a new website, an improved website, in order to make it more accessible to our members. And there will be educational and improve content of the website in an effort to reach out to as many members as there are. On investor relations, I'd like to thank Fred here. I think Fred Prungao. I don't think he's here, but he has been very active. No? On this note, I'd like to encourage SharePHIL members to volunteer in observing the annual stockholders meetings of our listed companies. What we have been doing, I think, for the past three or 4 years is to observe how stockholders meetings are being conducted by companies. Then we give our observations to the membership, to the SEC, and to the PSE in an effort to help them formulate rules and guidelines for our stockholders meetings. But let me emphasize that when we do observe stockholders meetings, we are not there to criticize or to make things difficult for corporates, because our mantra is to work with the listed companies, because we do believe that it's by working together that we can improve shareholders' rights and corporate governance. I think not many of you know by this time, but by this time we already acquired an office for SharePHIL. It's located in Pasig, and it's now we're now in the planning stage of how to get it renovated, and we will let you know once it gets inaugurated, and hopefully we will invite you there. I think, lastly, every year the highlight of our activity is our annual summit. Okay. For the past, we have speakers like Tessie Coson, MVP, the Lopez father and son tandem, the brothers, Fernando and Jasa. And hopefully, the 2019 summit is still the planning stage. But the theme that we have initially chosen is competition, co-opetition or competition. Okay? We're trying to invite speakers or at least panelists who can grace the occasion, but we will let you know, but we will announce the final details after we finalize the same. Our financial position is now very respectable. We have 20.86 million in assets, okay? 12.97 in billion current assets and 7.85 in investments. So your organization is in a healthy financial position, and hopefully we will be able to make use of these resources to pursue our objectives. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
We now have a new set of members who will be inducted. As Francis mentioned, we'd like to double the number of members to 200 plus next year. So in relation to that, we have our chair of the co-chairs rather of the membership committee, trustees Romy David and Jimmy Ismael, to introduce our 5 new members for induction. After which I'd like to ask Chair Evelyn and Francis to come forward for the formal induction. So is it Romy or Jimmy?
Well, today we are honored to formally induct. They were supposed to be 5 new members, but not all of them are here this afternoon as new members of Shareholders Association of the Philippines. Let me just acknowledge their presence and ask them to come in front so that they can be formally inducted. First one is Mr. Tomas Navazero. Mr. Navazero, please come forward. Then Rachel Paunlagi is another inductee. And Alexander Escucha, please come forward and to be formally inducted.
Raise your right hand, please. I state your name. having been accepted as a member of the Shareholders Association of the Philippines, do solemnly swear to abide by and uphold its articles of incorporation and bylaws, to commit and put into practice its core values and noble tenets of fairness, accountability, independence, transparency, and honor. I pledge to help promote awareness of shareholders' rights through responsible advocacy and shareholder education, and in so doing, to contribute to the building of investors' confidence and contribute to the development of the capital markets. This I pledge without mental reservation or purpose of evasion. So help me God. On the recommendation of the membership committee, and by virtue of the powers vested in me as president, I now formally admit you as new members of the Shareholders Association of the Philippines. Congratulations.
After this, may I request the new members to stay on the stage with the president and chair for a photo op. Just to put some perspective on the discussion today, which I think is quite a timely topic, just like to, for us to view a few slides on some kind of a refresher or a primer on fairness opinions in share valuations. Anna? So I want to quote Einstein here, as quoted as well by a valuation expert and professor of finance, Ashwat Damodaran. What he says is that Einstein was right about relativity, but even he would have had a difficult time applying relative valuation in today's stock market. So appropriate, isn't it? Why do we do valuations in the first place? We want to know what our business is worth it. And if we're raising money, buying back shares, we want to know the price at which we will execute such transactions as part of regulatory requirements. How do we value? We have various methodologies. The people in finance are familiar with this. You have discounted flash flows, comparable companies, net asset value, but we're not going to discuss it today, okay? Because that's another discussion which will take some time. But it looks at assets of the business, potential earnings, and how other companies with similar characteristics are being valued. Now, in one instance when valuations are done is when we are doing tender offers. And that's in today's newspaper, there's an article about a tender offer situation, which we may not discuss, which we'll discuss in general terms today without particular focus on the company. But if we look at who are involved in a tender offer, we normally get some big firms or investment banks to do a valuation to ensure that the price is fair for the public. We also commission fairness opinions from an independent, objective third party to validate the tender offer price. Because in most instances, minority shareholders rely on the fairness opinions, especially if they don't have the skills or resources to determine the fair value themselves. And of course, throughout this process, you have the PSE and the SEC and other regulators involved. So having deemed the price to be fair, the public then avails of the offer using his favorite broker, transfer agent, or bank. And then the entire transaction is completed. Finally, I'd like to share this quotable quote from Warren Buffett, just to put ourselves in the right perspective as the panel is discussed. Price is what you pay, value is what you get. Okay, with that, and for that particular reason also, we have deliberately chosen a panel which represents all the players in the valuation exercise. So let me begin with an introduction of the panel, some of whom are known to you. Okay. We had invited Commissioner Tonette Ide, but unfortunately she is unable to make it. But she has sent an able substitute in the person of the General Accountant, Mr. Raymond Artiza. Raymond, could you please? Emmanuel. I'm sorry, we got mixed. Manny or Mr. Artiza, do you mind taking your seat there? We've invited Erwin Avante from EDC, which had done a very successful, I might say, or representative tender offer. Erwin is CFO of EDC. Mr. Salvador Escaño from Pryce Gas Corporation, Chairman and CEO. Could you please join us on the red carpet? Of course, who doesn't know Ed Francisco? Trustee and also President of BDO Capital. Regina, where will you sit in the middle? Okay. Palakpakan niyo naman si Ed Francisco. Then we have Raymond Ricafort, co-founder and managing director of WPAL and also VP of Philequity. Raymond? My former colleague at SGV, Jade Roxas-Divinagracia, who is now managing partner of Pryce Waterhouse Deals and Corporate Finance. And finally, Mark Velasquez, Director, Head of Corporate Finance at ING Philippines. So we have we do have quite an outstanding panel today. The challenge is to elicit their opinions and views on the topic at hand. And for that purpose, I'd like to call on Regina Lay, no? Some of you have been interviewed with her in her previous life as a news anchor and at Bloomberg Philippines. So Regina, this is your panel. Could you please take it away? Maybe.
We do have a very well-rounded and esteemed panel today, so I don't want to waste time with introductions and get right into the topic. So the topic is fairness valuation, fairness opinions. But valuation exercise is an art, not a science, is something that I keep hearing. Is there anyone on this panel today that disagrees?
Valuation is both an art and a science. No? There's an art to it because there's a lot of subjectivity that you incorporate in terms of the assumptions. It's a storytelling in a way. Valuation is a storytelling. But it cannot just be all art as well. It cannot all be creative. You have to have some science applied to it. So there are tools that we use to do the valuation that lends credibility to the process as well.
I'd say it's both. There's a math side and there's an art side. The math side is, as you say, exact. And the art side is a bit more creative. And that's, I think, where almost always we have the arguments.
Generally, the fairness opinion is one of the last things that happen in reality. By the time we get the fairness opinion, the deal is done. Yes, because the ones who really work on it are the advisors and the issuer. Diba? We think of the fairness opinion lang as part of the boxes that you have to tick. Because you need the approval of the general approval of the shareholders and everybody. But in general, you're already talking to the majority shareholder. They control it. They have the votes already. You're doing this for compliance. So,
And also, Ed, because a lot of the times you want to avoid a situation where a deal collapses.
right. No, it's not even that because it's required, especially for listed companies. Otherwise, the deal is done already. You're just doing it, so you have to do it. So, and I'm just sharing for experience because we're all friends here. So by the time we do a fairness opinion, usually, if I'm the advisor, I even write the fairness opinion. I will already select who I want and recommend to the issuer who will write the fairness opinion. I cannot write it because I will already conflicted. I have to get a third party. But generally, we already know what we want written. If they will not accept what our recommendations are, we'll find somebody else to sign it for us. So, I mean, so that you know, the reason I'm sharing this, again, because you're part of SharePHIL, so you know where the weaknesses in the system are. Because it's chosen, as long as you're accredited, it's the issuer who can choose who the fairness opinion provider will be. So generally, let's say I'm working for Jimmy. It's a matter of cost. There's a total issue for the cost. I'm working for Erwin. So the total cost and timing, it's a key consideration. As part of the M&A agreement, remember, fairness opinions are not only needed for tender offers. They're needed for mergers, for buying companies. That's time-consuming. You need the PCC clearances. If you're worried about the fairness opinion, that's later in the game. The thing's already done at the initial level. You mean to tell me you try to acquire, let's say, Victoria's Wilson was buying another sugar mill, and then the fairness opinion provider will disagree? You mean to tell me they'll unwind the transaction? No, they will redo they will get somebody else but I'm not contradicting what Jade and the rest are saying because, frankly, because it's an art and science, we can make the fairness opinion any number we want to at the reality. We can make it come out that because it's so future, because of DCF and everything, you can always tweak it to whatever to meet the requirements of everybody. So it's really not
Precise.
I guess it's not precise, but because there's so much leeway, at the end of the day, you have to trust the issuer. Because kung gagaguhin lang tayo talaga ng issuer, maski ganong kagaling fairness opinion, even if you work with kami or Jade, lolokohin lang kayo. But if the issuer is trustworthy, by the time it gets there, then you're sure naman at least that they're not really there just to make one buck over the minority. I guess I'll just stop muna there.
Most of the time, the person being sold the asset could say yes or no. However, in certain cases, such as in a recent case,
Okay, we won't name names.
we won't name names, but the problem is when the public or the investors, especially since this is SharePHIL and the objective is to protect small investors, when the situation is not able to provide the small investor a choice, then that becomes an issue. And what is this issue? If, for example, an example is a company that recently decided they wanted to delist. There were protests from shareholders because it was deemed that the fairness opinion was unfair. The problem is whether or not the price was fair. The problem is if they delist, then you have a problem where the investor would need to sell anyway because most funds in the Philippines are only listed only funds, meaning listed equity funds only. The moment they delist, then there is a situation where they need to sell the equity anyway. So I think the core of the issue is really protect, the big boys, like Ed said, issuers and underwriters, they will talk to each other and they will have more or less an idea of whose track record of underwriters tend to overprice. But I mean, let's be honest. If Ed wants to be honest, the job of the underwriter is to maximize the value of the investor. The public's job and people who protect the public, like for example, SharePHIL, the job is to try to advise the public if this price is high. And in the market, that job is the brokers who issue reports. is this issue too expensive or too cheap
Right.
or whatever. So that's where the balance is supposed to happen.
Okay, so there's been a couple of really good points that's been raised. We'll get to the question of what is fair, as well as Ed's point about who's paying the evaluator in just a second. I wanted to get to Erwin first, so he could give a little bit of a background. So EDC, as we all know, case study as a case study, they delisted voluntarily last year, and by and large, investors deemed the offer price as fair. Could you just walk us quickly through that whole process, Erwin, again?
Okay. For the benefit of everyone, there were two tender offers that happened for EDC. The first one was in 2017 when the consortium of Macquarie and GIC tendered for about 47.5% of the total common shares, which represents around 31% of the total voting shares of the company. So that was the process that they actually undertook, and we were served notice about the tender offer. And then the second tender offer that happened is about a year apart. No, it's a year after, in 2018, when EDC decided to do the voluntary delisting. Because when Macquarie and GIC did the tender offer, the public float went down from 51% to 10.9%. And at that time, there were pronouncements from the PSC and the SEC that they wanted to increase the minimum public float from 10% to 15 and then 20. And so we were quite worried about that pronouncement, because if ever they do increase it to 15 and 20%,
You
then
would
we
fall
will
below
be
the
involuntarily
threshold.
delisted,
Correct.
and there would be penalties involved. No? And we don't want that, so that's why we undertook that process. But to Ed's point, just to walk you through what happened, it's true that the fairness opinion was the last to come in. And in our experience, the reason why it was the last to come in is because when we were talking to the advisor, IFA, Independent Fairness Advisor, they said that before we can actually engage them, they need to get confirmation from the PSE that they are independent. No? So that took a while before they actually got that. No? So we were able to almost complete all the documentation and all that. And I think the benefit on our part is, since there were two tender offers, we maintained the same price, no, at 725. The first offer was 725. The second offer was also at 725.
Do you remember how much of a premium that was to the current market price at that time?
40%. We didn't tell them the price, although it was quite obvious because the first one was 725. But we didn't tell them that for the second auction or second tender offer, that the price was 725 until I think the afternoon before we submitted the papers. No? Because we wanted them to do the valuation and then give them some sort of enough time to say that they have to indicate in the report that the price that we've said is actually fair in that respect. So the valuation happened ahead of us telling them the price for the finalization of the report.
Investors should be happy with that kind of number, but again, it brings us back to the question: what is fair? Does it always have to be a premium to the market price, or what is it? A premium to a 6-month weighted average? What should it be? Anyone? Mark?
Sure. So I think typically what we do is we look at multiple valuation methodologies. I guess the first one will be an intrinsic valuation. So you try to do a cash flow based approach and do due diligence on the numbers you're using to make sure that it's reliable. You can also look at comparables, so other companies that are being traded in the market, other transactions that have been done in the same sector, in the same country, or in the region. You can look at book value based approach, so you can adjust your net asset values. You can look at, let's say, replacement cost. So there are different methodologies you can use, which is the science behind it. But you have to evaluate which of these methodologies would give you what your estimate is of the fair value. Now, you typically arrive at a range. You don't pinpoint a value, and then that serves as a data point to investors on where fair value may be. And at least it gives them an idea, a data point that they can use to decide whether they want to tender or not.
What happens when the issuer is unhappy with your recommendation?
Now, I think that was where I wanted to add something. I think Ed was right in saying that in most cases, the fairness opinion is a formality. Because in most cases, it's a deal between a majority shareholder and a buyer. And in that case, the best basis for the deal, the fair value of the company, is really what they agreed. Right? I mean,
I
that's
can see
obvious.
a little bit of a conflict of interest here, and I think Joy Joy
no.
wants to weigh in.
No, so then the fairness opinion that an IFA can provide gives minority investors a view on whether the price agreed between the majority shareholder and the buyer is fair, and they can decide whether they want to join in the transaction or not. Now, I think the best example where someone like SharePHIL or a fairness opinion can protect the interest of a shareholder is in a take-private scenario, where, let's say, the issuer buys back the shares of the minority shareholders, or where, let's say, an existing majority shareholder wants to take it private. That's where the fairness opinion is most valuable, because it gives investors a good view of the value of the company.
Bigyan mo talaga yung shareholder ng choice. Bigyan mo talaga siya ng choice so that he becomes a willing buyer, willing seller. In an IPO at saka tender offer are two different things. Because in an IPO, binibigyan mo yung would-be shareholder ng choice. Pwede siyang hindi bibili.
Correct. The market decides. Yeah.
May choice siya. And that's good, that's fair. I mean, kung sa tingin mo mahal masyado yung di huwag kang bibili. Huwag kang bibili. Diba? But in a tender offer, hindi pwedeng hindi bigyan ng choice. Otherwise, it becomes unfair. Bigyan mo ng choice ang because if the price is not fair, let's say, to the small shareholders, the price is too low. But kung hindi siya magbinta, ang laking damage mapunta sa kanya eh. First, liquidity, kung ma-delisted, wala na siyang liquidity. Secondly, yung mga tax privileges of a listed company, yung buying and selling would be tax-free. Practically, 1/2 of 1% sales tax lang 0.6. So, in effect, in theory, hindi siya binigyan ng choice. He must sell, he must tender. Otherwise, those two benefits, liquidity and taxes, mawala sa kanya. Maybe the other thing that I thought might solve that is, kung may mag-tender offer, dapat aprobahan ng shareholders, pero hindi kasama yung mag-tender. Yun lang mga minority shareholders ang mag-decide. And this is done in some countries. This is done in some countries. It's not unique. It's not a revolutionary idea. It's not a radical idea. Dapat ang magboto with their, yung tender, ituloy yung tender or not, hindi kasama yung mag-tender, yung majority shareholder.
Can I just add something? Price is what you pay and value is what you get. So there's a huge difference between price and fair value. So fair value, as pointed out earlier, is what a typical buyer would pay to a willing and typical seller. So if we say, for example, that what you paid in a transaction represents the fair value, it may not necessarily so, because it's a price and it's impacted by other factors like the strength of the negotiator, the circumstances surrounding the buyer and the seller, which may not really be intrinsic to the value of the business. So we have to distinguish between price and value in that sense.
And you were telling me earlier as well, there's a huge difference between market value and fairness value.
Yeah, the market, say for example, the market price in the capital markets can be driven by sentiments, behavioral finance, any news. There can be a knee-jerk reaction from the investors, right? But value is, the intrinsic value of the business itself.
Now we got to go to the regulators, the SEC. Emmanuel, would you want to weigh in on what's already been said?
On the part of the regulator, tender offer is investor protection mechanism, especially for minority stockholders. And in certain acquisitions, the submission of the fairness opinion is required. So, on our part, we issued circular in 2013, which put some safeguards on the issuance of fairness opinion by PSE accredited valuers. So one of the safeguards there is that the the valuers should have more than 10 years of experience. They should not include prospective financial information unless this is supported by a reasonable basis. Then the requirement that they should take several approaches and say what's is more advantageous to the stockholders or to the investors. So we also require independence of the valuers. So that's on the part of the regulator. I think the one important aspect that we should look into is the independence of the valuer, because if that independence is lost, then the opinion is quite questionable. So we have to request the valuers to tilt the balance more on professionalism rather than commercialism.
And in fact, you guys are, the PSE is soliciting comments right now on a rule change wherein they want to offer issuers an option of 3 evaluators for any tender offer, any IPO, any M&A project. But as far as I understand, there are no sanctions at the moment for anyone who's found to be, deliberately undervaluing their stock. Is that right?
Currently, there's no specific sanction, but if there will be some misrepresentation or fraud, then SEC can come in to sanction not only the issuers but also the valuers.
Is there any motivation, incentive right now to tighten the rules around that?
For the protection of the investors, so there's really a need to revisit and strengthen our rules. Currently, SEC has requested for some technical assistance from, I think it's from JICA and ADB to help enhance SEC's capability as far as valuation aspect is concerned, not only for property valuers but also on credit rating. So hopefully with the enactment of the revised corporation code, where SEC was given some independence and a sort of fiscal autonomy, we have now one of the priorities of the Commission is really to enhance our regulatory capability. One of these is the valuation aspect.
One of the problems that people keep coming back to seems to be the question of who's paying for the valuer, right? You can all see the conflict of interest there. In some cases with the IPOs, whoever's underwriting it is also valuing it. Obviously, they're not going to be completely impartial. So what's the solution? Does anyone have one?
I was wondering, as far as paying is, the SEC and the PSE are considered sort of by the general public as referees, di ba? Parang referee sila. All the other shareholders are sort of trying to outsmart each other. But it's really trying to outsmart each other, di ba? But ang SEC and the Philippine Stock Exchange are considered, rightly or wrongly, as referees by the investing public. So I thought, why not let the PSE or the Securities and Exchange Commission contract the one that will have a fairness opinion and pay for it? That's nothing. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Escaño. No? In fact, I made that proposal to the PSE that instead of the issuer nominating 3 potential independent appraisers from which the issuer will choose one, di ba? The SEC should be or PSE should be the one choosing. Then, factor in na lang yung cost to be collected from the person doing the tender offer para magbabayad talaga yung PSE. I don't know kasi yun, di ba, may nagsasabi formality, there's a pre-agreed price na between the issuer and the appraiser and ano yan. So that's what I thought. No? That's why I think I'd like to also take advantage of this forum, no, to see whether that's a doable option. I made that as a personal proposal, but I don't know if SharePHIL can agrees with that approach. Kasi parang mawala yung suspicion, yung bias, no? There are a lot of things that can be done. For example, I was involved in, I think, in an SM transaction, where although it was the issuer that decided to hire the appraiser, it was the independent directors of that company who chose without the participation of the controlling shareholder. I thought that was a smart move, but it would it made too much burden of the independent directors. So there are a lot of things that can be done. But as Ed said, doable yun kung matino yung issuer, di ba? Pero kung hindi matino yung issuer, lalo na kung involuntary na listing, they will be the ones buying back. The tendency is to lower the price. Diba? And I think that has happened in many cases without naming names.
But, attorney, ang importante, I think, what makes it fair, or as near as possible to fairness, there's no perfect fairness, is if you give the shareholder a choice. Because if he becomes a willing buyer or seller, judgment na niya yun kung gusto niyang ganito or gano'n Kahit na hindi magandang kumpanya ito, that's his choice. So in an IPO, he has a choice. It's rather fair, I think. But in a tender offer for delisting, I think the minority shareholder should be given a choice. Kung magboto man, dapat hindi kasama yung magtitender.
Erwin,
Kasi
please.
wala talaga siyang choice because if he doesn't tender, if he doesn't vote for it,
It becomes illiquid, yes.
An illiquid
Right.
stock, plus yung tax.
Correct. Erwin, you have some thoughts on the matter?
Current proposal of the PSC right now where the issuer will parang give, or the company will give 3 names and then they will choose and then the company will pay for it. I have sympathy to why we're trying to do that. No? But from my standpoint, and I'm not saying that this is happening, but if a lot of people know of a transaction that is price sensitive, there is a high chance that there will be leak of information. And you don't want that to happen on a tender offer, especially if I'm the company doing the tender offer. Because if more people know about the transaction, I'm sure the price will move. No? And what I'm proud about with respect to the EDC tender offer was that there was no incidence of front running. Everybody really kept it confidential, no? And we never traded on material, non-public information. I think there are other solutions that could be adopted. And Director Francis Lim alluded to it. No? One is you have to have a good sets of good independent directors. In the case of EDC, we're happy that we have one. No? So our independent directors are Director Francis Lim, you have Ed Shua, you have Manny Ayala. And what happened was, just to share, they did an active role in the tender offer. So in the first tender offer, we got the notice from Macquarie and JC that they're going to tender. So the first thing that they did is they told EDC, you have to hire another bank, investment bank, to verify the valuation. So that's what we did. No? We got another bank to actually verify the computations. And then they also asked the different questions. First is it available to everyone? Do they have a choice? And is notice duly given? No? And then third is, do they have the right but not the obligation to actually participate? And then finally, in case of a scale back, so meaning, since Macquarie and JC were just getting 47.5, if there are more people who wanted to tender, let's say 50%, will they be treated pro rata, fairly? Will everyone be scaled back? No? And once those were all ticked, no, they actually issued a letter which we published to the PSC saying that the independent directors actually vetted the transaction. They're not recommending in any way that you participate, but at least they have an opinion to say that the transaction is fair and reasonable. So it's really up to you to actually decide and participate. I think the other one also, two other good practice that we can adopt is, second one is you provide a venue where minority shareholders will be heard, no? And then probably the third one, which we also adopted in EDC, is we made in the case of the listing, conditional. Because under the rules, no, there's a certain band wherein you can be involuntarily delisted, and then another band where you could be voluntarily delisted. So we were targeting the voluntarily delisting band. So we said in our application that we will only do the delisting if we hit this particular band. If not, then we won't hit. No? So it's really on up to the minority shareholders to participate or not. No? So there was not any gun on their head to participate, because again, if everybody in the minority decides to participate because they think that the valuation is fair and reasonable, then I think it gives credibility to the valuation and to the transaction.
Apparently, people don't feel like that's the appropriate venue. In this scenario, who should be the arbiter? The PSE and the SEC again?
They're the regulators, so I think they're in the natural position to actually be the arbiter.
Should there be an independent third body?
My understanding, and I think they are independent. No? So one thing that they can do is probably get another body to actually provide more credibility. You know, like for example, an organization that can, or let's say ask or SharePHIL, right? Or they can ask like what our independent director suggested, to get another independent investment bank to actually verify the valuation and see if there's
two valuers.
Probably that's a solution. Right?
I think the EDC experience was a pleasant experience for me, no, as an independent director. When this tender offer first cropped up, because of my experience back in the PSE, said, is the independent appraiser really independent? And that's where we as independent directors suggested that you should look for another one. Okay, and I think that's where the independent directors come in. Another thing in the process that I'm proud of is the chosen bank made presentations separately to the independent directors. Individually, I think they went around to each individual, and each one had its own set of questions. So I thought, and sabi namin, because the management was saying it will be above market. But a price that is above market is not necessarily the right price, di ba? We know naman, di ba? That's why we took it upon ourselves to really come forward as independent directors to make sure that we avoid, prevent, or at least minimize complaints. And I think there were no complaints, at least to our knowledge. No? We queried the bank. I recall the bank going to our office, Acrelo, and I had a lot of questions to the bank. And some they were not able to answer. And they said, come back to provide answers.
Do you want it to be as low or as high as possible? What's your answer? As high. That's if it were a tender offer. Wait, remember that you do fairness opinions. The majority of the deals are not for fairness tender offers. Tender offers are very infrequent. The majority of the fairness opinions are for buying assets. Do you want it the lowest or highest? The lowest. Baligtad, So it's not always the highest. If you're acquiring a company, you want, from a shareholder, you will approve it if it's low, because if it's overpriced, it's unfair for you. So it's a different perspective. You have to switch your hats also. So the majority of the deals, you want it to be low as possible. If it can be below market and yet we can justify it, that's good for you. Okay. And then just another clarification, in IPOs, tender fairness opinions are not required. It's only in and even when you do a rights offer, follow-on offer, it's not required. Okay? So but then there's a difference, and you said it correctly. Because if you're buying new stock, you have the choice to say yes or no. And that's what Raymond also said. Diba? That brokers can opine and say, I think it's expensive or cheap, so you don't buy. But it's different in other situations like tender offer. You're an investor already, you get stuck, and then you're hostage. No? So that's a very different case. I guess what I'm trying to say is maybe from a rules perspective or recommendations that Share will put, let's not put the same rules also or recommendations to all kinds of fairness opinions. It depends on what the situation is, because maybe it's the tender offer is the one most painful if you get stuck. If the tendering shareholder is balasubas and they divide really low, it's really below market, and especially if they have lots of cash, you know who that was, diba? But if it's a different situation, when you're buying a company, if you go through all these processes naman, it might take long, because remember, sometimes buying a company needs PCC, you're bidding against somebody. If you put all these processes, it could also mean your company will have less leeway and they will not be as competitive. Because if you give them all these additional rules, if you're, example, I'll just say they were bidding for a cement company, the recent one, let's say, they manage it very well. They medyo one decision, but very formal also, versus another with so many layers. To do all these processes, if you do this, who's the advantage in bidding faster and getting the decision more? So maybe that's something also. If you always like all the ticks and balances boxes, yes, it's good from a governance perspective, but you'd lose out on the deals, on the M&A deals. Your shareholder price will not move.
Very quickly, Ed, do you like the idea of taking the burden of paying for the fairness opinion away from the issuer? Does that solve things? Like, to Joy's idea, like say EDC was doing a tender offer, instead of them paying for the fairness opinion, the PSE or the SEC pay for it.
No, I mean, if it's paid by the regulators, of course, the companies would love it, because now it's all additional cost for the issuer, diba?
Of course, they'll never agree. But do you think that solves anything?
No. If you think about it, we are paying. Think about it this way: the listed companies, how much do we pay the PSE annually for our listed shares? We pay a fixed fee plus a percentage of your outstanding stock, diba? Of your market cap. There's a percentage. We're already paying them. So if you think about it, it's fair. But of course, that's very revolutionary. The PSE
So dapat
should pay
nga,
for it.
PSE should pay
Because
for it.
That's part of the cost of being listed, di ba, Jimmy? You're paying for that, eh.
Let me add. Because, as you said, in a tender offer, talagang walang choice yung shareholder. And that is what makes it unfair. Because, as I said, you can debate until doomsday. What is fair to one is unfair to the other.
Right.
But if you give the shareholder a choice, it makes it fair.
Right.
Now, can you imagine kung magbigay na ng fairness opinion yung SEC or PEC and they pay for it? In fact, I think they should pay for it because kung ibalik pa rin doon sa mayroon pa rin kunting suspicion eh. And the tendering company doesn't agree with it. Who do you think the public will believe? Public will believe that the SEC opinion or the PEC opinion is fairer, is nearer to fair than yung tendering company. Mapahiya yung tendering company. Hindi sila, they will not pursue the tender because they don't believe the opinion of as processed by the PEC and the SEC is not fair according to them. But they will suffer
maybe we should call in Mr. Monzon at this point.
No, I was gonna add lang, maybe another thing we can think about collectively as a group is not the fairness opinion process, but the rule na if the float goes below 10%, okay, kalata, you are involuntarily delisted. So if I were a company, my target is I will prop up the shares, I'll buy all the shares, I'm the majority shareholder, I'll buy up all the shares so that I will own 91%. So I will not have to do a tender offer because I'll be forced to delist it. So that's the loophole. It's not the fairness opinion, it's more that. If they change that rule where you're still required to do a tender offer even if you're forced to delist, then that's the protection for the shareholders. Diba? Because I can easily do that. I'll talk to my brokers, patataasin ko yung price, I'll buy all the shares. Once I have 91%, you're all screwed. Diba? Who hasn't sold?
Ed knows all the loopholes. I have to take a question from the floor now, please, sir.
I have a. Can I react na? Yeah, I'd like to challenge Francis' proposal. Kasi yung advocacy natin transparency, di ba, and fairness. I'm from China Bank. Okay? I'm proud to say we've been in the top 5 of PSE Bell Awards for governance for the last 6 years. And I'm in charge of investor relations. So it seems to me we're dealing with the fairness valuation issue at many different levels na conflicting, no? For one, on an ongoing basis, we already have a host of very, very well-equipped CFA certified analysts who have very rigorous models for valuation of companies. Case in point, for example, in an IPO situation, we were the underwriter for Eagle Cement. I think we have to bear in mind that the underwriter can conduct an initiation report, but there are 10 other analysts who will conduct a similar initiation report. So you don't really have a leeway to say, I will value this as 50 when everybody else is valuing it at 26. Diba? The market, if you're talking about the same rigorous models, and and just to point that out, that the level of rigor among the generation of analysts, the Philippine team from Ateneo just won the Global CFA Award in New York 2 weeks ago, the 3rd time in the last 7 years. And these are the population of the analysts, equity analysts, who are doing these things. Hindi na yung rumor-rumor lang, opinion lang. There's a rigor to it. The difference is, are you using a DuPont model or a Gordon growth model or a sum of the parts model? Then you can really parse the differences in their valuation. Hindi yung opinion ko kasi ito mas magaling ako sa iyo Wala na yun. It's becoming more objective. Now, so even if we had our own initiation report, there are a host of other analysts who are able to make those other valuation calls, and it's up for the buyer to say, masyadong mahal yun, even so, no? Even with the cement companies, the entire oversupply of Vietnam is greater than the entire capacity of the Philippines anyway, so prices will drop, and therefore the valuation is not good. This information is available to the investing public. So, now, with respect to acquisitions and mergers, by our own experience is that when we acquired Planters Bank, for example, we are required to submit, did you engage a third party to ensure that there is a fair valuation of the assets and liabilities of what you acquired? But, on the other hand, the market will tell you, because the analysts are telling us, any acquisition is a good acquisition at the right price. And therefore, if you're buying another bank, if you buy beyond 2 times 2 book value, then it's a bad acquisition. Diba? It depends. So I think, Attorney Francis, I think my focus here is our advocacy should be focused on rules, the playing field, the standards of disclosure, instead of saying, pardon me for saying this, that this should be the one to do that. Because who is to tell me that the PSE or the SEC is the better party for deciding who can do this job best? We know our business best Diba? So if they decide on something, what is their domain competence to know that this party is better at valuing the company I'm trying to buy? Ako nga magbabayad Diba? So, I'm sorry, medyo...
So you want better reporting standards?
Yeah,
and
I'm
transparency.
sorry. I'm more on just forcing the rules so that there is more disclosure, there is more transparency, because the analysts now are very good at, when they ask you questions, these are not softball questions. They test you and they put your numbers into their models and they will know whether you're winging it or not. And they hold you to account for it. At least that's my own experience.
As I said, that was my personal opinion, and I don't want to make that proposal officially unless we have an agreement there, no? But the question is, I think the reason why the public has doubt is that first, that independent appraisal company is chosen and paid for by the issuer. Okay? So the question is how to solve that. Now, I think the SEC and the PSE, having been involved in valuation as part of their mandate, have the expertise, no? They have all the track record of these companies that they accredited, and that can be part of the database from which they can make a decision. But I know if I were a regulator, of course, I would resist that, no? Resist that, because I don't want to be blamed at the end of the day. And I think that's where the resistance from the two regulators is coming from. I don't want to be the one choosing, because if something goes wrong, I will be the one to be blamed. That's human nature.
But also, I think Alex's point is that's not the end all be all.
Yeah.
There has
Well,
to
the
be
rules, no, is one thing. But I think the PSE is now in the process of revisiting its rules on valuation. No? And this may be a proposal that may be considered or adopted depending on what they say. Because at the end of the day, it's they that will decide on what the rule on this matter should be.
Fair
So
enough,
I'll
Raymond.
go back to what Ed said and what we thought was the topic for today. It was really about tender offer. All the other, the valuation field is so wide.
Wide, yeah.
Yeah, but just to help us for just one specific topic, which was really, I think, what you told us at the time, which is tender offer rules and the role of valuation on that exercise. I think the regulator, the PSE, the self-regulatory body, is heading the right direction, which is to give a lot more power to the disadvantaged side, which is the minority. Let's put it this way, when a company goes public, he made that choice. When he decides to go out of being public, he already, dinamay mo na yung minority, yung public, and therefore, there must be some process at which you sacrifice. I think asking them to lose their power of choosing the independent valuator is one thing they can lose. The second is, I think, we have to look at the loopholes in which they are able to force the public to sell at the price they want. And that's all I think I want to, as a group, SharePHIL, for example, to help identify, or Ed has identified loopholes. But as he said, if the issuer, like this current topic that we're, without naming their names, this group, comes in at a certain offer price, and then 2 years later, when the business is doing well, diba, pays a price half of what they asked for when there wasn't any business, and then says that's fair. I think even the common sense person who's not a CFA, or even somebody who's not good in valuation law, that's not fair. So for me, the loopholes is on tender offer is the more critical one. As I said, and as even your own directors have said, when there's a choice and there's many opinions in the market, you can always say no. But in a situation where the issuer will find a way to get himself delisted, then the public or the minority is trapped. And that's where I think we need to strengthen the rules in the exchange.
From what you've seen, Raymond, what are some of the arbitrary metrics that companies use
Ed
to
already said
deliberately undervalue their shares?
Or one, they'll undervalue their shares. Second is, I'll get myself less than 10% so that, the exchange will tell me you are. And I think you guys saw the headlines today. This company is not even ashamed to be involuntarily delisted.
We're not going to name names because they're not here to defend themselves.
No, well, it's MRP, Melco Resorts. And they're not from here. So, I mean, let's go to the crux of the matter. They did offerings at 12 pesos and 15 pesos. They delist at 7.25, ginaya pa yung presyo ng EDC. But when they did the offering, it was a promise. There was no revenues, there were no profits. They did it at 12 at 15. When they did the, and I think it's in public, we wrote a letter. Yeah, so when they did the tender offer, it was 6.25. When we protested, they said, okay, we will withdraw our tender offer, but damage is done. We know you will try to buy everything and you will delist. So, in short, they had very smart lawyers who unfortunately were Filipino. No, not Accra. Well, I mean...
Again, let's try not to name names, shall we?
Yeah, but in fairness, not to be personal, and all of us know this, professionals are paid to do their jobs, diba? So, whether it's Accra or whichever law firm, they're definitely, I mean, criminals, killers are given lawyers and they have to defend them. It's the same. So it's a professionalism that we are sworn to perform, diba? But I'm just saying, it's as a person who manages money of the public, we are also sworn to protect their money. So the SharePHIL and the regulator can help us by identifying which rules are actually hurting us and the minority, and hopefully taking these out. Or at least giving us more teeth to avoid incidences where a bully can just take our money away.
We're going to go to the SEC for a response, but before that, let me flip the question around. Is there ever any instance when a company is justified in offering less than the current market value for their shares? Because no one complains when it's at a premium, right? But surely there's got to be an instance where they're justified.
Well, Melco offered the premium, but remember the stock price went from 16 down to 2 pesos. So it was all over the place. So a premium may be very subjective in this case. So what we're trying to say is a fairness opinion is actually very critical in the process of the tender offer of this company. And it may be the same thing in other future tender offers. So we should take away the advantages which an issuer has, especially given that once they are public, they've already drawn the money of minorities, and therefore there is more urgency or at least more justification to protect the minorities and the public.
Mr. Arquiz, go ahead, please, sir.
Yeah. Earlier, there was a suggestion that perhaps certain decisions can be made just by the minority shareholders themselves. So maybe tender offers or choice of another valuation outfit can be done, or can be subjected to that rule that the choice be made by the minority shareholders. It's interesting to note that in the integrated corporate governance report, there is already a recommendation that for boards to have effective shareholder voting mechanisms, such as supermajority or majority of minority shareholders requirements for voting, be the system, the mechanism to protect minority shareholders against actions of controlling shareholders. This is still a supplemental recommendation, not yet mandatory. The setting up of the mechanism. But the moment publicly listed companies have that mechanism, and this is normally applied during the annual stockholders meeting, but it can be used also for situations where you have a tender offer. So it can be done. And as we have heard earlier, there are countries, or jurisdictions where the minority shareholders are being asked among themselves to make certain decisions.
Okay, because the criticism is independent directors are elected because of the majority or controlling shareholders. So our solution when the corporation code was being revised was a double majority. Majority of the whole and majority of the minority. Then the code will define what a minority shareholder is. No? Unfortunately, that was not carried. And I had a long discussion with Senator Dillon. Francis, sabi ni Senator Dillon, it's hard to put it in the law. But let's put something in the code, and it's now there, which will empower the SEC to prescribe the manner of voting, that qualifications, the security and the tenure of independent directors. Because one criticism about our independent directors, if they exercise about this independent directors regime, is once they exercise their true independence, kung hindi matino yung control issue, the next year wala na sila. So what SharePHIL wanted is a 3-year tenure. But hindi nilagay yun. But the code, if you look at it, has that provision that empowers the SEC.
Give the mechanism.
Yeah. So the SEC can come up, yeah. Yeah. Now the majority of the minorities, that's something new. If you look at the PSE rules, it's there. In terms yung additional listing. So no, it's not a new concept, no. But the SEC under the revised corporation has that ability to prescribe that kind of voting. It has not been done because obviously the new corporation code is just in effect last February. But it can be moving forward.
So it is a step in the right direction. Any other questions from the floor, by the way?
The SEC already imposed that voting requirement when we came out with the rules on material related party transactions, where under the rules citing sections 31 of the revised corporation code that for a material related party transaction, it should be approved by 2/3 of membership of the board and majority of the independent directors. If that threshold is not met, then the transaction should be approved by the shareholders holding more than 2/3 of the outstanding capital stock. Yes, sir. It's also in the rules. So regarding the situation mentioned by on the what we call voluntary delisting. So I think the SEC is currently reviewing the public float requirements. Probably that issue on if you fell below 10%, then you will be delisted. So I think the inputs from the discussion here can be considered in the policy to be issued by the Commission with respect to the public float.
You're looking, so these are feedback that you are taking into consideration as you amend the regulations.
I have to raise this to the appropriate SEC department.
Jade, I haven't gotten your opinion yet on the suggestion earlier, again, to take away the burden of making the issuer pay for the cost, a fairness opinion. Does that change anything? Make the PSE and the SEC pay for it?
Well, deciding who pays the fee is just one aspect. I think what needs to be looked at as well is the credibility of the one who issues the fairness opinion. So when we accept engagements that requires us to issue a fairness opinion, we don't look at our duty of care to the client itself, but to whoever will have access to our report. So that duty of care of a fairness opinion issuer should be looked at as a higher level of standard. And I think that's where, firms with global brands would come in terms of the reputational risk that they're taking if ever, they put out a report that will not stand scrutiny. So I think more importantly, the regulators, and as a challenge to SharePHIL, is for shareholders and regulators to really look at the reports that come out from the accredited firms, whether or not there's sufficient diligence and sufficient work that has been done to support the numbers and the analysis that they are putting their name onto it. So hopefully...
But that's hard to guarantee.
Of course, but hopefully with that, if more people will be calling out, very, very glaring inadequacies, then, people will be held, the issuers will be held to a higher level of standard in that sense, no? And it uplifts the credibility of the profession as well.
Mark?
Yes, no, I just wanted to add, for us, we have global committees where we need to defend our valuation before it becomes public,
Right.
because there is a very high reputational risk with respect to your report being made public.
Talk us through that committee a little bit. Talk us through the process.
Sure. So I guess before the report becomes public, and when we've done all of the preparatory work, the due diligence, all of the information gathering on the market numbers. Then we present the final report to the committee, and then they approve it before it becomes public. So that's an internal check that we have to ensure that it's...
That could be a best practice.
Yes. Now, on the question as to whether or who engages the IFA, I had an experience before where we were reporting to the board of directors, not to the company. And in some cases, like maybe EDC, that can be to the independent directors who are there to protect the interests of the minority shareholders. And if the SEC is already on its way to help in ensuring that independent directors are truly independent, then that obligation to appoint the IFA can be something that the independent directors can do. Yeah.
So the company pays for the assessment,
In
the
our
assessor,
case, it
but
was
ultimately you report to the independent board.
Yes. So in our case, it was engaged by the target company who received the offer from another party. And it was the directors who engaged the IFA.
Please, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that on top of that reputational damage, there is a provision in the Securities Regulation Code which will make the independent appraisal legally liable, in fact criminally liable. Section 26 of the, which penalizes anybody who, in connection with the sale or purchase of security, commits any device, scheme, or artifice to defraud, or would commit any act that operates as a fraud to the investing public.
Is that being enforced well?
Not like in the Philippines, but in the other countries, it's not. I still have to see one.
Sir, is that in the current law?
Yeah, it's in the current law. It is not in the Securities Regulation Code.
Maybe SharePHIL should work
Hands
together
up.
and help.
It was used against a broker.
Show of hands, people who didn't know that.
Yeah, anyway, I just want to, yung mga appraisals na yan, because they may not know this provision. In the same manner that many directors do not know about the short swing rule. If you're a director or an officer of company, if you buy a share of your company, you're not supposed to sell that within 6 months.
And that's why getting a fairness opinion
Short
is
swing
not
rule.
cheap, no? Because of the risks attached to it.
Oo. So, magaganon. That's why I think yung information campaign about this, the ICD for the directors, I don't think many of the ICD directors know this. Yeah. Officers, it also extends to officers. Pero that's why when we are engaged as counsel for the issuer in ACRA, before the IPO or after the IPO, we have a special lecture to them. What should they expect as a listed company?
Mr. Lim, I have a suggestion here that maybe SharePHIL as a group can make a case of someone and actually prosecute. What do you think?
Tingnan natin.
Make an example since you already know the provision,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, in fact,
Give examples.
well, naming anyway, it's public, di ba? Yung Kalata. SharePHIL went to the SEC, investigate this act in Babian. Unfortunately, ano pa nangyayari sa Kalata sa SEC? I think si Chairman Emil was still the commissioner in charge of prosecution at the time.
For Kalata, sir, SEC has already filed a case on the disclosure, and it's already for arraignment. I think for arraignment at the Pasay.
I understand that some cases have been dismissed.
On this side of the market manipulation way back in 2012. Pero itong current, sir, yung 2016 disclosure on the Macau casino, subject na po siya ng...
How about yung insider trading? We also asked the SEC to investigate Kalata for possible insider trading.
I have no information on the insider.
See, we found out that when they did not disclose the material information, some of the insiders actually traded. So we were asking the SEC to investigate that.
I think the chair is on top of this, and every meeting there's a discussion regarding this case of the commission.
That's one case where the SEC can really demonstrate to the investing public that it means business.
I heard kasi grabe yung law firm representing Kalata doon.
Sino? Hindi. Meron.
Akra for everything. I don't think we came up to any concrete solutions, but I hope we've at least enlightened some of you and, helped you thinking in the right direction.
Valuation is both a science and an art. Okay? It was also mentioned that the issuer's reputation and credibility is what matters. Yeah. Professionalism versus emphasis on professionalism versus commercialization. Therefore, valuers should exercise what Jade says, the duty of care in doing their work. We also heard about the need to tighten SEC rules or to review SEC rules in respect to the regulations covering this particular issue. Some proposed solutions: get independent directors involved, participate in various aspects of the exercise, provide minority shareholders a venue to air their concerns, grievances, etc. Of course, an interesting question was, are independent appraisers really independent? And are independent directors really independent as well? And finally, a question on who should pay for the work? And when is the price the right price or the fair price? Okay, so with that, I'd like to close this meeting and thank you all for coming. We hope you found this an interesting and valuable forum. We're trying our best to make our future GMM topics as interesting as we can to entice you to attend and participate in the discussion. So good afternoon to all. Thank you. So board, when the board members are present, please join the photo.